so much. And I wanted to thank you all as a society for having me here, and especially thank you, Janita, for picking me up and having me at your house and taking me for 3 meals now. And we rescued an owl, and I mean, you don't get that everywhere. So it's really been wonderful so far. All right, so I'll just try not to face that guy. New World Orchids. Yes, we specialize in Japanese orchids. I actually just got back from Japan on Tuesday. So we might need to turn that down just a tad. Yeah. I just got back from Japan on Tuesday. I think I'm finally over my jet lag, but I'll throw some comments about my most recent trip in. Japanese Orchids is small and mighty. At the first show I ever did as the owner of New World Orchids, I was talking to somebody about the orchids, and I was explaining how great they are and how easy to grow and hard to kill, and she said, so they're small, but they're mighty. And I said, yes, exactly right. So that's why I got the title of this talk. Okay. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about 4 different species. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about 3 species, and I'm going to talk a lot about 1 species, which are the Neos. But I just wanted to introduce you to a couple of the other species that are associated with the Japanese. The Japanese love their small plants because they have small spaces, but they like to pack a lot of good stuff into where they are. So, Cymbidium japonica. This is a species that's native to the southern part of Japan, specifically Nago. Therefore, its Japanese name is Nagaran, or orchid from Naga. There was a rumor going around that these guys have been reclassified as Phalaenopsis, and you can see that their leaves are kind of Phalaenopsis looking, and the flowers looks like some of the species phals, but apparently that was not true. They haven't been reclassified. But they are a breakout group from another genus. Do you know what Cymbidia originally was classified as?
Arides?
Yes.
Arides?
And how did they come up with Cymbidia from Arides?
It's backwards.
It's backwards. Exactly. Yes. Cymbidia. So Arides backwards, Cymbidia. So Cymbidia japonica. This is a beautiful little plant with these lovely white flowers with purple bars. Very fragrant. I mean, Neos are very fragrant. These are very, very fragrant. They will fill a room with these little tiny flowers. They are easy to grow as long as you are not overwatering them. Now, a lot of orchids can recover pretty easily. Once you realize you're overwatering and you stop overwatering, then the plants will recover. You get more roots back, the leaves come back, yet not with these. You start overwatering them, once you start seeing bad signs, you might as well either give up or just order another one because they do not recover well from overwatering. These grow best if you are an overwaterer. I would suggest growing it in a basket or in some way that will prevent you from doing that overwatering. Because they really are a worthwhile plant to grow. They're quite lovely. So intermediate conditions, they don't like to get too cool, but they can take really hot conditions, which I know that's more of a problem for you. So next slide. Cymbidiums. There are some Asian cymbidiums, 3 species in particular, Cymbidium encephalium, Cymbidium sinense, and Cymbidium gueringii. These are 3 of the most cold-tolerant species you'll ever run across. They are, like all cymbidiums, terrestrial species, but these guys, in more moderate places, well, actually, maybe for you guys, they could stay outside all year. Like many of the species that are loved by the Japanese, these are collected more for their beautiful foliage than for the flowers. Not to say that the flowers aren't beautiful, because they are. They're not as showy as some of the hybrid cymbidiums that you're used to seeing, but they are really lovely and very fragrant. I had one bloom. I didn't even know it was blooming because I associate them with blooming earlier in the year. And I was walking around, this is outside even, I'm walking around trying to figure out where the smell is coming from. And it was one plant hidden among all of the cymbidiums, and it filled my whole growing area. It was amazing. Typically, the flowers are not as ornate as this orange one that you see here. They're usually more in the pink, maroon, green sort of color group. This orange one you would find on a plant that might run for maybe $500 if you got that lying around. But you can get much cheaper plants, and again, it's this beautiful striping pattern, and sometimes you see what's called a snakeskin pattern. So grown more for the leaves than for the flowers. All right. This is Dendrobium maniliforme. It's a nobile type of dendrobium. So they do lose their leaves in the winter, which freaks people out sometimes, because this is the time of year you'll start to see some yellow or brown spotting, and you think, oh God, it was growing so well. Now what have I done? But it's just that time of year. That's going to happen. They'll start to drop their leaves, and then they look like little bamboo canes over the winter. In the spring, the first thing you see popping out are the flower buds. And the flowers are really quite lovely. They're typically white or yellow or pink. White is the most common color. And once again, they're very fragrant. They remind me of lily of the valley. So it's kind of like a scented soap. It's a nice, clean fragrance. Like many dendrobiums, especially the nobile types, they really need to have temperature fluctuation and a cold period in the fall in order to bloom well. They'll grow well without that cold period, but they won't bloom well. Another thing that I have happen a lot, do you find it hard to be mean to your orchids sometimes? Do you feel that you might overbaby your orchids? Well, if you're too nice to these guys and you water them well, not overwater, but if you water them well during the winter, you'll get kikis instead of flowers. Now, that's not the worst thing in the world, right? But if you want flowers, you got to be a little bit meaner to them in the winter and let them dry out a little bit more. And for those of you who don't know, you can always take a look at the canes on these guys. If they're big, fat, and plump, they're full of water. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. But you want to be a little bit mean to them in the winter and maybe let them get just a tiny bit shriveled. Okay? So instead of watering once a week, maybe water once every 2 weeks or so. You might notice that this plant has beautiful leaves. This is another one that's collected more for the leaves than for the flowers. The Japanese believe that you've got limited space, so you should enjoy your orchids 365 days a year, not just when they're in bloom. So they want something that looks pretty all the time, and this is one of those. Let's see, I think I hit everything. Oh, intermediate to cool growing. Talk about a plant that is cold tolerant. So the Cymbidiums, I said, were some of the most cold tolerant orchids there are. This is another one. I have a guy who buys orchids from me. He's in North Carolina, and he grows these outside. He's doing a little experiment. He's a science geek like myself, and he wanted to see how they would do. So he had them outside, and this was, 3 years ago now when we had the record low temperatures. He had them outside for the whole winter. In February, he put one of those temperature guns on it. It was 15 degrees outside in February, and they were blooming. So, just saying, if you want something that you might be able to leave on a protected porch or something, these guys would fit the bill. So, very cold tolerant. Just a note, many people associate cold tolerance with cold loving. that's a cool grower, meaning they don't like to get hot. That's not true for these Japanese species. They are temperate growers. They grow very hot all the way down to very cold. So don't feel like, well, we're not cold here. We're never going to be able to grow that. It's not that they're limited to cold. It's that they are able to tolerate cold. But they also tolerate heat. And I have seen that in Japan. I've seen them out when it's 40 degrees outside. But also when I was just there, they're having a warm spell like you guys are having right now too. And in the greenhouse, it's well over 100 degrees. And those guys are in there. So yeah, they're very heat tolerant. Then we come to the star of the show, Neofinetia falcata. Now we were talking, you were saying that in the front of the AOS magazine, they've got a place where it tells you how to say each of the genera, each of the orchid genera. And this guy's in there, Neofinetia, also pronounced Neofinetia, even Neofineia. So I asked our resident expert, AOS judge, what is the proper pronunciation? And he said, none of those. I said, what? He said, it's Vanda.
Right.
Okay, well, Vanda is easier to say, but to me, it is misleading. Because when you picture a Vanda, you picture this big plant, right? Big green plant with roots that go all the way down to the ground and big old round flowers on it. That is not Neofinetia. So I will stick with Neofinetia. Also, if you go to Japan and you ask for Neofinetia, they will shake their head at you, not understanding. And if you say Vanda falcata, they will shake their head at you, not understanding. And you have to call them Furan, wind orchids, or Fukiran, rich and noble orchids, or samurai orchids. That they understand. They only call them by their Japanese common name. Wind orchids because they're epiphytes, they grow up in the trees. Samurai orchids, or rich and noble orchids, because there was a time when only the rich and noble, or samurai, were able to own them. More on that in a second. But, okay, if they're so great, and so rich and noble, and all that stuff, how do you grow these? Are they hard to grow? And the answer is no. They really are, and a lot of orchid growers will tell you this, they really are one of the easiest of all species, all orchid species to grow. First of all, they're very heat and cold tolerant, up into over 100 degrees, and down into, now, some people have had experience with growing them below freezing. The orchid grower that I just went to see in Japan says his go down to minus 10 C. C is important. C is important. Okay? But that's still 14 degrees F. I had experience with my plants going below freezing, 32, right? It was not a good experience. It was a deathly experience. So I will say 30s, but not freezing, just to be on the safe side. If you would like to do your own experiment, by all means, feel free. But I would not do that experiment ever again. So, very heat and cold tolerant, but I would not go below freezing. They bloom once a year, as many species do, between late spring and early fall. That said, sometimes I get some blooming in February, and I've got a couple blooming right now. It's weird. Moderate to low light. Now, these guys will tolerate high light, like a typical Vanda will, but they will not grow great in high light. It tends to make their leaves grow smaller, if that makes sense. Okay, you can't grow smaller. But as new growths come on, you will not see the leaf expansion that you would see under moderate to low light. And as we'll see some of these varieties, some of the varieties don't get the good color that they would under high light. They do much better under moderate to low light. So I actually went from 50% shade cloth to 70% shade cloth. And then I went to 50 plus 70, one on top of the other.
Whoa.
I know.
Epipedium-like?
Yeah,
Or
and
Phalaenopsis-like?
it's, yeah, foul-like is fine. And I really found they did a lot better, a lot better. So the most important thing to know is that they are like a bandit in one way. They like to dry out between waterings. As with most orchids, what is the easiest way to kill them?
Overwatering.
Water. Don't overwater them, and they will be kind to you. Now, unlike the Cyderias, if you do overwater, but you don't kill it dead, it will come back. Okay, so they are, again, they are mighty. Small and mighty. They are tough for you. Okay, next slide. A little bit about the history. So anything that is a Neofinetia falcata is a furan. It's a wind orchid. But there are some specific varieties that are considered special, and those get classified as fukiran, or rich and noble orchids. And there was a time that only the rich and noble were able to own them. So the samurai would collect them and give them to the shoguns in order to garner favor or money or property. And so in this picture here, very famous picture, you see the samurai are defending a very prized Neofinetia here, fukiran, that is covered with a screen. The screens were made out of copper or silver or gold and protected the plant from nasty little fingers. And what was cool was when I was just there, we were visiting a grower, and he had some of these screens that he had made by hand. I mean, if you saw the fine work of creating this, it was amazing. It was amazing. So they would put screens over the plants to protect them from people. And then, if you were allowed to see them, you would have to cover your mouth so as not to breathe your nasty germs on the beautiful plants. Yeah. And if you haven't figured it out yet, I did Photoshop this orchid onto this picture. Okay. Just so you know. All right. Okay. Well, now some of you have visited the table of orchids over here and looked at some of the offerings, and some of you have no doubt noticed the price tag on them. And some of them do not have a small price tag on them. They have quite a large price tag on them. And you might think, this is a small plant with a large price tag, and I'm not going to get it. Now, that is your choice, but I do want to at least explain where that price tag comes from, because there is a reason for it. And there is a reason why people go nuts for this species. I mean, there are a lot of neo-freaks out there, and I want you to explain the craziness. There is an explanation behind it, or at least some explanation. Orchid people are crazy. Neo people are just one step above. So, one species, Neofinetia falcata, over 2,200 varieties. Not counting hybrids. I'm just talking 2,200 varieties of that species. That's a lot of variation in one species. So what I'm going to show you is the differences among those 2,200. I will not discuss 2,200 varieties, I promise you. But what is it that sets them apart from one another? It has to do with the leaves, the roots, something called the scale, and the flowers. We'll start with the leaves because that's the most important part. The leaves are anything that's different from normal, typical, is going to make it special. So this is a typical furan, a common, everyday wind orchid. Beautiful plant, lovely white flowers, very fragrant. Anytime, if you change anything about the leaves, that will make it special. So we'll look at all these different kinds here. One of probably my most favorite group are the bean leaves. These are plants that have shorter than average, kind of fatter than average leaves. So if you compare this to the standard furan, which might have leaves out to here, these guys are shorter and fatter. And these are just 3 varieties: Kirinmaru, Komaru, we'll see a huge one of these later on, and Otakamaru. Most of these will have either the standard white flower or we'll see a special flower, star-shaped flower, later on. Next. These are princess leaves. Princess leaves take that standard leaf and make it a little bit thinner, a little bit more delicate looking. And then this particular one, Kishuraiakufu, what else is special about that? It's got color. It's got some purple on it. Purple is really hot in Neoland right now. And then what's special about that one? Variegation, exactly. It's got this lengthwise variegation. Not to say that all princess leaves necessarily have something else associated with them, but you see that this is a thinner leaf. Next slide. Peacock leaves. When the leaves are pointing up rather than over like a typical Vanda, this is considered a peacock type leaf. This is a Kaio Maru, and I know that Jerry got one of these today, and somebody else got one of these today too. Ah, yes ma'am. So I brought two, and two of them are gone because they are beautiful plants. And I have more coming over from Japan that are just jaw-droppingly stunning, one of which is not going to get sold. It's going into my collection. And we're going to see that guy again for another special thing. And then this is Gekikan, again, pointed up like this, also having this variegation. These are pine needle types. The great thing about these, from my point of view, is they're really interesting looking with those very skinny, pointy, needle-like leaves. Also, they are very fast-growing. And probably part of the reason they're really fast-growing is because they're not putting energy into blooming. They're not good bloomers for the most part. And what's interesting is that whole Japanese thing of enjoy your orchids 365 days of the year. So it should be something that you enjoy looking at. Beginners almost always pick up one of these pine needle types. Oh, tell me about this guy. He's really cool looking. Yeah, he is. He's really cool looking. It's going to make a beautiful specimen plant, very fast growing. What about the flower? Well, you're not going to... that guy might not ever bloom. That's okay. But you loved it when you saw it. And so my argument is you should get it because of how it looks. I mean, think of all the other plants that you have in your house that don't bloom. You buy them because of the beautiful foliage. Okay? So that's my argument for this guy. I think he's this thing over here, Yoridoshi, is to me one of the coolest looking orchids ever. Its name, Yoridoshi, has to do with armor. It's like armor piercing. So this is supposed to look like little daggers. And do you see what he's in a little pumpkin. Yeah, that was for a Halloween display. That turned out really cool. Don't leave them in there too long because not good. Now this is Fukujumaru, which is sort of a bean, sort of a pine needle type, and he actually is a decent bloomer. So it's not that they never bloom, except for some. It's that many of them are reluctant bloomers. Okay. These are contorted growths. So you think about your standard Vanda, leaf, 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 straight up. If you twist that, you got these guys. And many of them also have very pokey looking leaves like the pine needle types, but they are actually very good bloomers. You would think something that looked that funky wouldn't bloom very well, but these guys